Well, it seems that the Archbishop of Canterbury is shocked at the reaction to his verbal suicide bomb. He received quite a lot of abuse. One person even called him a Judas, which I thought was a little unfair. I mean, what did Judas ever do to deserve that kind of abuse? Yes, okay, he betrayed Jesus, but the Christian Church has betrayed him every day for the last 2,000 years, and nobody seems to care about that. The Archbishop is a very clever man, but he's clever in a useless way because he lives in a bubble. All this stuff is theoretical to him. None of it will impact on his life in any way, so he can well afford to be magnanimous about it. Personally, I don't think it will affect his credibility because I don't think he ever had any in the first place, but I think his words are important because they're symptomatic of a wider malaise in British society. Whenever there's a clash between Islamic culture and the indigenous culture here in Britain, yes, I did use the word indigenous as opposed to Islamic, i.e. alien and foreign, just thought I'd clear that one up. Whenever they clash, the indigenous culture is always presumed to be in the wrong, in the interests of community cohesion, of course. For example, polygamy is illegal in Britain, but Muslim polygamists not only get away with it, they now also receive extra state benefits for their extra wives. Hate speech is banned in Britain for everyone except extremist Muslim imams who are free to preach hatred against Jews and homosexuals because if we required them to obey the law, well, they might be offended. I would say that we ought to be ashamed of ourselves, but of course we already are, which is why all this is happening. Now, Western society has its faults, as we all know, and as the Islamists themselves never tire of pointing out. But personally speaking, they're faults that I can live with. Islam, on the other hand, has faults that I can't live with and I won't live with under any circumstances, and a lot of people in this country feel exactly the same way. The reason that we don't want any aspect of Sharia law in our society is because it's a manifestation of clerical fascism, and because it favours men over women, which makes it a violation of civilised democratic values. And the reaction that the Archbishop received, which obviously did affect him, which just goes to show what a bubble he really does live in, and it also explains why so many Muslims were puzzled by his remarks, but the reaction is an illustration of the anger that people feel at not being allowed to express an honest opinion about Islam in our society, because rather than calling things honestly by their name, we're always encouraged to hide behind cowardly euphemisms to avoid offending people who've got nothing to be offended about. Just last week, for example, we were issued with special politically correct guidelines about how we should refer to Islamic terrorism lest we give the false impression that it's got anything to do with Islam. We're talking about terrorism carried out in the name of Islam by Muslims and justified using their holy scripture, but apparently it's got nothing to do with Islam. Well, I'm sorry, but just because every Muslim doesn't support it doesn't mean it's not Islamic. People say you can't judge Islam by its followers, but that's like saying you can't judge a football team by its results. Islam is its followers. Because there's no central authority, the Quran is open to interpretation by men who, being human, will always interpret to suit their own cultural prejudices. So Islam is its followers. It's a representation of how they interpret their holy book, and therefore the only way it can be judged is by their behaviour. Unfortunately, right now, for all of us, that is Muslims and non-Muslims alike, the driving force behind the religion is Saudi Arabia, where most of the terrorist money comes from and where many of the so-called community leaders in Britain get their funding. And this particular brand of Islam preaches intolerance, hatred and righteous bloodlust to children. And people like the Archbishop, who think that every situation can be resolved by respectful dialogue, even while the people they're talking to are stepping on their faces, these people are part of the problem, not the solution. The solution is not more appeasement, dialogue and debate. The solution is to enforce the law equally and impartially for everyone, regardless of whether it's inconvenient for some Muslims. The solution is to prosecute those who incite terror, to close down the mosques and deport the imams. Any sane society will be doing this automatically. We need to stop treating Islam like a special needs case. If I were a Muslim, I'd be insulted by it. The police should stop consulting with these so-called community leaders before raiding premises or making arrests. They should stop pussyfooting around in mosques. If a criminal is hiding in there, go in and get him out. There should be no more pandering to Muslim sensibilities in the public arena. No footbaths in public washrooms. No separate days for swimming where nobody else is allowed. No special job conditions that don't apply to others. And nobody should be allowed to teach children or appear in court while wearing a ridiculous mask. There should be no restrictions on non-Muslims, like when Scottish Health Service staff were forbidden to eat lunch at their desks during Ramadan in case somebody happened to be fasting nearby. And there should be no cultural sensitivity of any kind involving Christmas or pigs or dogs. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, the classic story of the Three Little Pigs, the classic children's story, was censored by a committee of English middle-class bedwetters desperate to show how culturally sensitive they are at everybody else's expense. And it's a classic story. We all know the story, I'm sure. The Three Little Pigs, they're building their houses, aren't they? One of brick, one of wood, and with a naivety that would embarrass even a Dhimmi archbishop, one of straw. And we all know what happens. The big bad wolf comes along and blows down the first two houses, but he can't blow down the brick one, so he flies an aeroplane into it and blames the Jews. Isn't that it? No? Gosh, you know, it's so long since I read that story, I guess I'll have to go back and read it again. That's if I can find a copy that hasn't been pulped in the interests of community cohesion. Peace to everyone, especially to all those Muslims who are as embarrassed as I am by this cloistered, bubble-headed fool